Witness the colossal boxing showdown nobody expected, live on Netflix. International superstar Jake Paul, the sport's most watched fighter, takes on Britain's two-time unified heavyweight world champion and Olympic gold medalist, Anthony A.J. Joshua, in the most dangerous and defining matchup of their careers. This is Judgment Day. Watch Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua, Friday, December 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, live on Netflix.
When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk.
Oklahoma basketball records an 89-67 victory over Kansas City, and that's all I'm going to say about it because, well, it was Kansas City, and we've got a big football game to talk about instead. Oklahoma getting ready to host the first playoff game ever in Norman against Alabama. And that's all we're going to talk about today on this episode of the Sooner Nation podcast. Just paying a little bit of homage to basketball first, though. Look, most college football games are decided by execution. I'm talking about assignments, angles, play calls, who blocks better, who tackles better, who throws it better. But college football playoff games, those are decided somewhere else. They're decided in the space between snaps, in how teams respond when the plan begins to bend or just break apart. How many players carry pressure or how many players let the pressure carry them. And when Oklahoma and Alabama meet again on Friday night, this is where this game is going to live. Because nothing about this matchup is mysterious anymore. The playbooks are familiar. The film has been torn apart frame by frame. The personnel on both sides is known. But what isn't known and what can't be rehearsed is how each team handles the emotional weight of a postseason rematch when everything tightens and nothing feels casual at all. This game, it won't be won because one team, quote, wanted it more. That's not how these type of games work. This game's going to be won by the team that stays calm when the moment demands clarity instead of chaos. In other words, this game won't be decided by surprise. It'll be decided by composure. Let's start with the thing that makes this rematch different from almost every other playoff conversation that we've ever had with Oklahoma, and that is memory. When Oklahoma walked out of Tuscaloosa on November 15th, they had a 23-21 win in their back pockets. They didn't just earn a resume line, they planted something that night. That game unfolded in a way that still doesn't sit comfortably with the Crimson Tide. Alabama controlled the yardage. They controlled possession. On paper, they looked like the better team for long stretches of that game. But Oklahoma controlled the moments. What I mean by that is the Sooners, they forced turnovers. They converted mistakes into points. They tightened defensively when the game narrowed. And when Alabama needed rhythm late, Oklahoma completely took that away. Those moments, they don't reset because the calendar flips another month. What they do is they linger. They show up in preparation. They show up in confidence. And yep, they're even going to show up in the form of doubt. And that's why the real question in this rematch for Friday night is not what will Alabama do differently. Really, the question is what happens when the game starts to feel familiar once again? Because I think it will. And here's where Oklahoma holds quite maybe a quiet but very real edge. And that's the difference, right? A massive difference between believing you can win and knowing that you already have won. And Oklahoma already crossed the hardest mental barrier back in November. They didn't hang on and keep it close. They didn't survive. They didn't get lucky. What the Sooners did that night in Tuscaloosa is they executed. And that matters because it changes how pressure is processed. The Sooners don't need early validation in this game. They don't need the first drive to go perfectly, and they don't need to prove that they belong on this stage. They've already done that. They've already lived through the discomfort. They've already stood in the fire. They've already walked out of that stadium, the opposing stadium, with proof. And that creates a quieter confidence, not the loud, chest-pounding kind, but the kind that shows up after a false start or after a missed tackle or even after a stalled drive. It shows up when a team simply lines up and trusts the next snap. Teams that carry that proof instead of hope, they tend to play more freely. They don't chase moments. They don't force heroics. They don't, they don't force mistakes and mental errors. What they do is they make cleaner decisions because they're not seeking affirmation. And that's a dangerous mindset to carry into December. Now let's talk about Alabama, because this is not about questioning their pedigree. All right? They have elite talent. They have championship infrastructure. They have a staff that understands how to adjust, but they're carrying something Oklahoma is not. They're carrying expectation. Alabama doesn't enter this rematch searching for belief. They enter it searching for closure. From their perspective, November was a game that shouldn't have happened, one where statistical control didn't translate into victory. And that belief makes sense, but it also adds weight. Alabama isn't just expected to win. They're expected to restore order in this game. And expectation has a way of influencing behavior. What I mean by that is quarterbacks, they tend, when there's an expectation, a heavy expectation even, they tend to press for decisive throws instead of patient ones. The guys calling the plays, they tend to chase early control instead of gradual leverage. Defenders, they hunt momentum shifting plays instead of trusting their structure. Pressure doesn't weaken great teams, but it does alter their rhythm. And rhythm matters deeply in these high-level type football games like we're finding Friday night in the college football playoff. So that brings us to coaching. And this is where rematches are often misunderstood. Postseason rematches rarely hinge on creativity. What they hinge on more than anything else is restraint. Oklahoma's staff has clarity. They know what worked. They know what didn't. Their players trust the plan because it already produced a win. What that does is it allows Oklahoma to coach from reinforcement, not reinvention. And in games like this, stability becomes an anchor. Now, Alabama's margin is thinner. They require adjustments. They are expected to make corrections. But there's a fine line between refinement and disruption. Too many changes can create hesitation. Too few invite repetition. Early decisions, how aggressive to be, when to trust patience, how fast to respond after a mistake, those will tell us more than any other halftime tweak. In rematches, the first quarter often belongs to the sideline that feels the least urgency to prove something. And here's the part that we as fans in Sooner Nation often miss. Momentum in playoff football, it's not defined by points, it's defined by posture. Oklahoma, if they're able to land the first punch, let's say they get a sustained opening drive, a sudden stop, an early turnover, pressure immediately shifts to the Alabama sideline. Because now Alabama is not just playing to win, they're playing to fix. But if Alabama starts fast, that spotlight flips. Now we're watching for Oklahoma's response. Do the Sooners, do they remain calm? Does confidence remain steady? The first mistake, it's going to happen. It always does. What matters is what follows that mistake. Watch the body language, watch the tempo, watch sideline looks and see who's settled. See who looks reactive. The first touchdown, that's just an event. The first response, now that's the message right there. And yeah, this game is in Oklahoma's house, and that matters as well, not just because of noise, but because of belief. Home field advantage in a playoff game shifts emotional gravity. And this is the first time we've ever experienced something like this in Sooner Nation. In Oklahoma, what they do, what this team does, what every team does, is draws confidence from routine, familiarity, and an environment that reinforces belief instead of testing it. For Alabama, every mistake is louder. Every missed opportunity echoes longer. Every Oklahoma surge is amplified by a crowd that already knows what their team is able to do. This isn't hostile territory because of history. It's going to be hostile because of conviction. Mental edges don't vanish with alignment changes. They don't disappear because a staff makes adjustments. They live in preparation, trust, and experience. And Oklahoma showed its discipline and its composure once already in a much harsher setting than what they're going to face on Friday night. Those traits, they won't fade at home. They shouldn't fade at home. They sharpen. The Sooners don't need perfection. What they need is comfort. And in playoff football, comfort, that equals leverage. So here's the truth as we head into Friday night. This game won't invent anything new about either program. It'll reveal what already exists. Alabama has talent and pedigree. Oklahoma has proof and belief. And when the tension rises, and it will, the outcome will hinge on which team understands the moment for what it is, not for what it represents. Friday night won't answer who looks better on paper. It's going to answer who carries the weight better when the paper no longer matters. And that is where playoff football games are actually decided. What's up, everybody? This is the Sooner Nation Podcast. Thanks for hanging out with us. Before we move forward, make sure you give us a subscription, a like, a positive rating. So glad you're here with us as we break down Oklahoma, Alabama, first-round college football playoff. We'll be back right after this.
In Walmart's Louisville, time was ticking away. Only a few nights left till the big holiday. But last-minute gifters had no need to worry. Walmart Express Delivery got their gifts in a hurry. From Nintendo to Nespresso and Lego flowers, they could check off their lists in as fast as an hour. All of Louisville, East, West, South, and North could order gifts up until 5 p.m. on December 24th. So this holiday, just do as the Who's do. With gift delivery this fast, they all gasped. From Walmart? Who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
As we kind of alluded to in the first segment, by the time Oklahoma and Alabama kick off on Friday night, there won't be any surprises. I mean, none. No mystery formations, no hidden tendencies, no personnel questions. Both staffs will walk in with thick binders, clean tendencies, and answers to almost everything that they saw when they first faced each other. Almost. Because rematches at this level, they're not decided by surprise, right? They're going to be decided by stress. And when margins shrink, when execution tightens and adjustments cancel each other out, games swing on people, specific people, players who force opponents into uncomfortable choices, players who don't always dominate box scores, but they dominate moments. Oklahoma already proved it can beat Alabama. We talked about that. That game happened in Tuscaloosa. It's not a secret, probably a dead horse at this point. But the rematch, it's not about reinvention. It's about whether the same pressure points still hold. And there are, I believe, 3 Sooners that Alabama's going to have an answer to. They're going to have to solve the equations to these 3 guys. And let's start on offense. Because if Alabama's defensive response is about discipline, then John Mateer becomes even more central to this game. Now we know this. He's a polarizing figure. You love him, you hate him. There's really no middle ground, I think, on Mateer. Now the quarterback position, I think everybody will admit, is a step up from last year. But for a lot of people who are used to the Baker Mayfields, the Kyler Murrays, the Jalen Hurts. He's not there. But he's better. And he's got this team in the playoff, like Baker and Kyler and Jalen did. But whatever. But he didn't light up the stat sheet in November. That's a game that's been well documented. Oklahoma was outgained by nearly 200 yards. For the Sooners, there were no explosive avalanches, just moment after moment after moment of turn it on. There were no highlight reel quarterback showcases out of that. What Mateer did, though, is damaging. He converted chaos into control. Here's what I mean. John Mateer accounted for both of Oklahoma's touchdowns in that first, their offensive touchdowns, I guess I should say, in that first Alabama game. But more importantly, you saw him extend drives when Alabama, quote, won the chalkboard battle. When the X's and O's were lining up towards Alabama's favor, John Mateer still extending drives. And again, that's something that matters. Because Alabama's almost certainly going to defend him differently this time. I would expect more conservative coverage shells. I would expect fewer all-out blitzes. I would expect a commitment to forcing Oklahoma to be more patient, more particularly John Mateer to be more patient in the pocket. And here's the irony in all this. That plays directly into John Mateer's strengths. Mateer is at his best when defenses do everything right except for finish the play. He doesn't force throws into danger. He doesn't panic when the first read disappears. He steps up when rush lanes collapse. He hits timing throws on third and medium, and he uses his legs just enough to punish over discipline. And in that November game, Alabama held Oklahoma scoreless in the Sooners' final 4 offensive possessions, but the Tide still lost. What that does is it tells you how damaging John Mateer had already been earlier in that game when leverage mattered the most. Now, here's a moment to watch for on Friday night, right? Let's imagine early second quarter. You're looking at a 3rd and 6. Alabama has the coverage right. The route combination gets smothered up, but John Mateer doesn't force a throw. What does he do? Instead, he's going to slide. He's going to reset. He's going to find a check down guy, maybe Jaron Kanak, and that turns into 8 yards instead of a punt. The drive continues, the field position flips, and Alabama's sideline, they tighten up a little bit. In playoff rematches, extensions matter more than explosions, and John Mateer is built for that reality right there. Now, let's flip to the defensive side of the ball. Because if John Mateer represents controlled chaos on offense, Kip Lewis represents suffocation on defense. Lewis is not a guy who hunts highlights. He hunts timing. In this first game, Lewis finished with tackles for loss. He finished with sacks that arrived at the exact moments where Alabama really needed comfort. You saw no panic from Kip Lewis, but you saw him induce panic on Alabama's side. Now, his pressure didn't always create turnovers, but what it did was compress time. And against Alabama, time is oxygen. So here's what I think. Now, there's people already disagreeing with me on social media. That's fine. By the way, social media, shameless plug. Look up our Facebook page, 16,000 followers and growing. We're thankful you're with us. Now, expect the Tide. I think, here's what I really believe they're going to do. I think you're going to see faster tempo. People are disagreeing with that, and I could be wrong. I've been wrong a lot in my life, but I'm expecting faster tempo. I'm expecting quicker reads. I'm expecting more conservative, safer throws. But all that depends on one thing, time in the pocket. And Lewis disrupts that without really overcommitting. What he's able to do is he's able to diagnose quickly. He closes decisively, and he forces quarterbacks to move before they want to. And what makes him especially dangerous is how he arrives. All right, he's not screaming off the edge. He's not selling out on a blitz. He just shows up on second effort, on delayed pressure, on plays where the quarterback thinks the threat has passed by. And against Alabama, that's lethal because when the Tide stayed on schedule, they moved the ball. But when they didn't, they stalled. They turned the ball over, and suddenly they're back on the sideline. So again, like we did with John Mateer, think of a moment like this, like middle of the third quarter, right? Alabama's trying to regain control after a stalled drive or something. They're looking at 3rd and long. Same situation we had John Mateer in just a little bit ago. Kip Lewis doesn't need a sack here. He just needs to force the throw a half a second early. Doing something like that calls the ball to sail. It causes the drive to end. It gives Oklahoma breath. And in a game that's going to be defined by adjustments, the defender who controls rhythm controls belief. And Kip Lewis does that quietly and relentlessly. Now, here's the guy that I think everyone is going to be looking at big time on Friday night. That's Eli Bowen. This dude is a field position thief. I think it's an X factor that a lot of Alabama fans are going to remember for two plays. One from last season's game, one from last month's game. But Oklahoma fans know there's a lot more to Eli Bowen than just two plays. Because the defining moment of that November game, it didn't come from Oklahoma's offense. It came from Bowen's 87-yard interception return. But we've seen him be in a position to lock down Ryan Williams. We've seen him be in a position to break up pass, to be disruptive, to be a blanket. But everyone wants to go back to that play. And it's a great play. Because it didn't just change the score, it changed the emotional geometry of the game. Alabama's driving, momentum was real. One throw later, Oklahoma's celebrating, and now Alabama is chasing. That was not luck. That was patience meeting preparation. And I believe Eli Bowen's true value lives in his restraint. Against the layered route concepts that Alabama throws out there, especially on the intermediate crossers and timing throws, this is not a guy who gambled. What he did was he waited. And when the window appeared, he closed instantly. Now, here's the twist. Here's the thing. Almost like John Mateer earlier, Alabama's likely adjustments here are going to be safer throws, quicker decisions, but they may actually increase Eli Bowen's influence. Because conservative passing still requires precision. Timing still matters here. And defensive backs who understand depth, they punish hesitation. And Bowen doesn't need another touchdown to matter. It would be pretty cool if he did, but that's not what he needs. Just him being on the field, what it does is it shrinks throwing lanes. It forces quarterbacks to off of their first read. It alters the play calling tendencies. That's invisible pressure, the kind that never really shows up again on that box score after the game, but it dictates entire possessions. So let's give Eli his moment. Late second quarter, Alabama is debating whether to press or to protect before halftime. Third and long, Bowen's coverage discourages the throw to his side of the field. The ball goes elsewhere, incomplete. Alabama's punting. And Oklahoma survives that drive without damage. I don't expect there to be a celebration, no replay loop, just one more possession erased from Alabama. And those are the type of plays Oklahoma made in Tuscaloosa, and that's the type of plays that you would expect Friday night. And let me tell you why these X factors here travel, even though it's a home game, because these aren't emotional advantages. They're repeatable advantages. Mateer's poise doesn't depend on opponent mistakes. Kip Lewis's pressure doesn't rely on risky calls, and Eli Bowen's instincts, they don't fade with familiarity. Oklahoma doesn't need career nights from any of these guys. What the Sooners need is consistency from them. The same pressure applied over and over until something breaks. That's how rematches are won. Alabama's going to adjust. They always do. They'll be sharper. They'll be cleaner. They'll be more deliberate than they were in November. But adjustments don't eliminate pressure. What they do is they redistribute it. And Oklahoma already knows where Alabama is feeling pressure. Until the Crimson Tide prove otherwise, I believe these three guys, these are unanswered questions for the Tide. Not because they're flashy, but because they stress the exact areas that rematches are most exposed. Discipline, timing, and belief. And a game like this, belief usually belongs to the team that already knows that the answer works. One more segment coming up. We're going to go not just Oklahoma, Alabama predictions. I've got all 4 college football playoff predictions for this weekend. It's going to be fun. Hang with me. I'll tell you what I think is going to happen to the Sooners on Friday night.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. You're ready to move your business forward, but first, you need to find the right team. Start your search with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It can help you reach qualified candidates fast, ensuring your listing is the first one they see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. See the results for yourself. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
The 2025 College Football Playoff is finally here. Let's predict the first round. Who advances and why? You got 4 first-round games, 4 very different matchups, 4 opponents to learn exactly how pressure reshapes football when there's no next week. What I want to do in this final segment is walk through all 4 opening round games. I want to make picks not just based on vibes or rankings, but on matchups, environments, and stress points. And yes, Sooner Nation, we're saving the best for last. I'll give you Oklahoma, Alabama as the very last pick. Keep you on a little bit of suspense. So let's start with Saturday afternoon. The first game, Miami at Texas A&M. Kyle Field, first ever college football playoff appearance for both programs. And I think this game is pretty fascinating because it's both historic and volatile. What I mean by that is this. Miami's at Texas A&M. You got 2 programs stepping into the playoff spotlight for the first time at one of the loudest stadiums in all of college football. On paper, the Aggies are favored by about 3.5. But when you dig into how these teams actually win football games, Miami quietly checks more boxes than people realize. Let's start in the trenches. Miami has one of the top-ranked offensive line units in the entire country when in terms of pressure rate allowed. Now that matters because Texas A&M's defensive identity is built on pressure. They're top 10 nationally in generating it. So this becomes a classic unstoppable force versus immovable object matchup. And if Miami's line holds, even just well enough for Carson Beck to be positioned to attack an Aggie secondary that ranks 108th nationally in defending the deep ball, that's going to be a problem. Now, flip sides here. Texas A&M's offense wants to run the football and use Marcel Reed's mobility to stay ahead of the chains. Miami is going to say, you know what, good luck with that, because the Hurricanes come into this game with the 7th-ranked rushing defense in the country. They allow under 87 yards per game. And when A&M gets forced into obvious passing situations, they rank 94th nationally in success rate. Now, here's the hidden stuff. Turnovers, penalties, discipline. Texas A&M is -7 in turnover margin and near the bottom nationally in penalty yards. Miami, +9. In a playoff game, especially one with the first ever college football playoff nerves, those extra possessions and hidden yards, they're going to matter. And the return of, Keontae Scott into Miami's defense, suddenly this matchup tilts. So Kyle Field, it's going to be loud. Miami's going to have to weather an early storm. But once again, when this game settles, I think it's Miami's balance that wins out. I've got the Hurricanes advancing, and, I got them covered. Give me Miami by, let me tell you, 28-24. Give me the Hurricane by 4 points. Let's move on to game number 2, Tulane at Ole Miss, a rematch with a very familiar script. Let's be honest, okay, right up front. We've seen this movie before. These 2 teams met in week 4. Ole Miss dominated Tulane 45-10. Now, Tulane is better than they were in September. They're the AAC champions. They are more physical than they were, and they're more confident. But the matchup problem is not changed for the Green Wave. Ole Miss's offense is a schematic nightmare for Tulane's defense. Trinidad Chambliss torched them in the first meeting. Over 400 total yards of offense, including more than 100 on the ground. And if you're going to say the Green Wave are better than they were in September, I think you got to say Chambliss is as well. Tulane ranks 124th nationally in passing yards allowed. Ole Miss specializes in vertical stress and tempo. And then there's the running game. Kawan Lacey, All-American. He leads the SEC with 20 touchdowns. Even with Tulane's respectable run defense, Ole Miss ran for over 240 yards in that September game. That's when you include the quarterback carries as well. If Ole Miss establishes the run early, which I think they will, then the play-action game is going to open up, and that's where I think this game turns ugly. Yeah, I know. I hear you yelling at me. There is coaching transitions on both sidelines. I think that favors Ole Miss. You lose the Tulane advantage by their coach leaving as well. This is where I think depth begins to matter. SEC depth usually wins out in the second half against group of 5 opponents, especially when tempo ramps up. Now, I think Tulane's going to put up a fight. I think they'll compete. I think they'll even land a punch or two, but Ole Miss, they control this game. I've got them winning by multiple touchdowns. I don't even know what the point spread is, but the Rebels are going to cover. They're going to advance. Give me somewhere around a 21-point win. Let's say 38-17. Here's the sneaky competitive game that I want to throw out here, okay? This might be the game that people overlook, but maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should tune in just a little bit to James Madison at Oregon. The Ducks right now favored by 21.5 points, and they probably win. But this game, I think, is more interesting than what that line might suggest because James Madison is not a typical 12 seed. They come in with the number 2 defense in the country. Their front is disruptive, and they can stop the run. They're elite at controlling tempo. Now, they rank second nationally in time of possession. They typically hold the ball for over 34 minutes per game. And that matters because shortening the game is the only way underdogs survive, especially environments like Eugene, Oregon. The Ducks, though, very balanced, very disciplined. You got a top 10 defense, you got an efficient offense, you got a strong turnover margin, and you have one of the toughest home field advantages, again, in college football. So this feels like a game where Oregon pulls away, but I think only after a grind at first. I think James Madison is going to make this game feel uncomfortable early. I think they're going to slow things down. I think they'll force Oregon to earn every possession early, but just like Tulane and Ole Miss, I think depth wins out. I think Oregon covers, maybe. I think they win comfortably, maybe, but only after struggling in the first 15 to 20 minutes of this game. I think it's worth at least checking into. Oregon advances. Let's do this. Let's say Oregon advances, but let's say James Madison covers that 21.5. That's what we're going to go with. So let's go with the score somewhere around 30-13 in favor of the Ducks. All right, Friday night, Norman, Oklahoma. Everything on the line. Here we go. This is the one we've been waiting for. Alabama at Oklahoma, a rematch in the playoffs, a November result that still echoes, and now a Friday night game at Oklahoma Memorial Stadium in December. The line is flipped. This opened with Alabama favored. The Sooners are now a 1.5-point favorite. Maybe R. Mason Thomas had something to do with that, but that tells you where we are in this thing. Let me tell you why Oklahoma has the edge. Let's start with the defense. The Sooners rank 7th nationally in scoring defense, and they lead the SEC in defensive efficiency. In the first meeting, they forced 3 turnovers, and they shut Alabama down in the red zone when it mattered most. Now, let's add some context here. This game, as we talked about, as everybody knows, it's in Norman. Noise, it matters for the Sooners. Emotion matters for the Sooners. And Oklahoma has already proven that they can beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Now they're getting a massive boost with the return of R. Mason Thomas. He didn't even play in the first meeting. But his presence off the edge, it changes how Alabama's going to protect and how comfortable that they're going to feel in the backfield. Spoiler, they're not going to feel very comfortable at all. The Tide, they're going to adjust, all right? I do believe that they're going to try to do, and maybe even do a better job at protecting the football. They'll try to play cleaner, clean up the penalties. They'll try to control tempo. But here's the thing. Oklahoma, as we talked about, the Sooners don't need chaos. They're comfortable in tight games. They're comfortable defending short fields. They're comfortable letting pressure build on the opponent. And Alabama, for all its talent, has shown vulnerability when forced to be patient on the road. To me, this feels like another grinder. Another game where every possession feels heavy. Another fourth quarter where belief is going to matter. So here's my prediction. Here's what I got for you, Sooner Nation. Oklahoma 23, Alabama 20. Sooners advance. They cover, and they prove again that what happened in November wasn't a fluke. So this first round of the playoff, it's not about flash. It's about who handles stress when margins disappear. Miami, they're going to handle it. Ole Miss, they're going to handle it. Oregon, they're going to handle it. And Friday night, Oklahoma is going to handle it. That's the bracket. That's the prediction. Now it's time to get ready and watch them play. Enjoy your weekend of college football, Sooner Nation. We'll be back on Sunday to talk about, hopefully, Oklahoma's second round matchup in the college football playoff. But regardless of how it goes, we're going to have our thoughts. We're going to have our opinions. Thanks for being a part of it. Enjoy your weekend.